Hello, this week we're going to look at two pairs of salt cellars, which I hope isn't going to bore you to tears. And the reason we're looking at them is because they're made by the same maker, but for different clients. And it shows you the variety in what a single workshop could produce, depending on the whim of the customer. And sometimes when people collect the work of a particular goldsmith and saying, you know, I want his work because his work is the best that there is, technically that may be the case, or it's certainly very good, but it may not be the most elaborate. It may not have the most work put into it, simply because the customer wanted something affordable, more affordable and simpler. So don't always be led by names, but we'll look at these now. These are both of the pairs of salt cellars I'm going to show you are by John Hamilton, or at least John Hamilton's workshop of Dublin. They are early George and George II. This is a very typical pair of table salt cellars. You will find these all over the place. It's, I say, a British form. It was also found in America. The Americans like to use it. Less frequently found on the continent. Until towards the end of the 18th century, they preferred trencher salts and held on to that form a lot longer than we did. But we very quickly adopted this. These are lovely. They're made around 1735, 1740, so they're slap bang in the reign of George II. It's a lovely period of silver. And this is before you get sheet silver being produced at the end of the 18th century, so all that very thin Bateman type stuff that's made, which is still beautiful and beautifully engraved, but it doesn't have the feel of this stuff because this is all hand raised. This bowl started life as a little ingot of silver and was meticulously hammered out, and so hand raised. But these feet, these little pad feet, these were cast and then applied. And I don't know what goes on with Irish silver. Maybe it's the raucous nature of dinners in Ireland, but a lot of table silver is the worse for wear. These, although beautifully repaired, and I think repaired maybe 100 or 150 years ago, have all had the feet off. I think all of those feet have been off, and a couple of those feet have been off. And I think this is when drunkenness ensued, things were dropped or thrown, and the minute one of these hits a hard, stately home floor from any distance like that, this cast foot, which is quite strong and springy actually, has a tendency just to pop off. So I don't know if you can, it's a good example of showing you, if I can, you can see, you can't really see it from the outside. That's beautifully done because the silversmith that did it knew you were looking at the outside of it. But on the inside, you can see there the telltale lines, little patches of solder and little dimples and sometimes little air bubbles that you get. But you can almost feel it as well. And just to show you, that's one that hasn't popped off. That's absolutely clean, and there I think you might just be able to see some discoloration. You'll see it there, and you know it makes a difference towards the value of things. These in perfect condition would be an absolute fortune, but it makes things more affordable. The reason I bought them at the time that I did is they actually have really super marks on the base for Dublin. As I say, about 1735, Hamilton's maker's mark. You've got the figure of Hibernia, and you've got the crowned harp. You don't have a date letter. A lot of 18th century Dublin silver omits the date letter. They're just not that bothered. Sometimes the date letter will be struck and one of the other marks will be omitted. But unless it's a big piece, it can actually be quite unusual to get a full set of Dublin marks on an object, so it does happen. If you want to date this stuff, what you have to do is you have to get a copy of Jackson's or one of the large hallmarks guides, and you have to become familiar because the harp and the Hibernia do change You know, every year and a half, the harp has more strings, it has a different crown, it's longer, it's shorter and fatter. Same goes for Hibernia, variations on the shield, the form of the figure. And if you get used to those, you can date a piece of Irish silver quite accurately. I think I did date these from memory to about 1737, but let's say 1735 to 1740. Fits in with Hamilton's working dates. One unusual feature that I will mention, only because I've never seen it before, and you might have seen it before, in which case you think, I've seen that before, Michael. Scratch weights. I don't know if we've talked about scratch weights. I'm sure we have. I can't have gone on for over a year now without mentioning them. But they are the original weight of the object when it was supplied to the customer. So they knew what they were getting, but they also knew how much silver they were paying for. So in this case, the scratch weight, which is normally inscribed, well, normally you don't get them on salt cellars. If you do, they might be inscribed on the base. Here, Hamilton's popped it on the foot. It's quite a discreet way to do it, I think, quite a nice way. It says 3 ounces, 12 pennyweights, and there are 20 pennyweights in 1 troy ounce. 3 ounces, 12 pennyweights on that foot. And just showing how handmade they are and how they vary, it's 3 ounces, 8 pennyweight and a half on this one. So this because it's all hand wrought and hand raised, this just worked up a few pennyweights lighter even when it was made, although they are a pair. They still weigh over 6.5 ounces. Objects will lose some of that weight over years, just either by polishing, or in this case, I'm sure they would have had a crest, and that's been lightly removed. That removes a little bit of silver. And because they've been repaired, when those repairs have been carried on, they've probably been tidied up, filed, polished, and again, more silver's been removed that way. But the remarkable thing about them, if there is anything remarkable about a pair of very domestic Georgian salt cellars, and they are tactile things, is the weight. You can find a London pair of these with no problem at all. But once you pop them on the scales, they will weigh about 3 ounces. It does say something to the quality of Hamilton's workshop that these are over 6.5 now, and when they were made, they were 7. 7 ounces of silver for a small pair of salt cellars is pretty remarkable. And because they are hand raised and they've still got most of that in them, they are incredibly tactile pieces of silver. And one thing you must do when you collect silver is you must pick it up and handle it. It's very good watching videos like this or going to museums and looking through glass, but it does not replace the actual touch and feel of holding objects. If you were to put that in my hand blindfold, I would know it was something of tremendous quality because of the weight difference and because of the feel of it, and it's just super. So do handle this stuff when you go out and see it at fairs and at auctions, and maybe even buy it yourself and have it at home. Do pick it up and handle it. Don't just stick it on a sideboard. But that's the example of what Hamilton will provide you with as a domestic customer going in, and these were probably like this because they were part of a large service or a large set. It's not unusual, as Tom Jones would say, to have a set of 4 or 8 or 12 of these originally, all running down the table, because one salt cellar would be placed between 2 diners, and they would have a little shovel or spoon, and you would use your shovel or spoon to put salt on your dish. So they were shared, but if you're having a large dinner, you might certainly need 6 if you had 12 people, and if it was more. So, but that's a fairly standard pair, but lovely marks, lovely scratch weights, lovely feel, lovely gauge. Nothing wrong with those. However, these are also by John Hamilton. These bear only a maker's mark on one of them. The marks on the base have been nearly obliterated by hundreds of years of polishing. It's quite tragic. I bought them, and of course nobody knew they were Irish. Nobody knew they were by Hamilton. These are leviathans of salt cellars. These are quite ridiculous things. One of these salt cellars now weighs over 9.5 ounces, which is, 50% more than the other two put together. They're not tremendously bigger, they are deeper. They have this fantastic casting. This is quite a typical Irish feature on the very best Irish silver, this lion mask. Of course, you get it on the work of people like Paul de Lamery. You find it on quite a lot of very good Newcastle silver. Cookson will deploy this sort of mask as well. But that has a typical lunatic, wonderful, glorious Irish feel to it. The other thing about them, which is quite remarkable, and I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, unfortunately, is normally, if these are decorated, these are swags of flowers. Certainly on Paul de Lamery ones, you'll see swags of flowers or swags of drapery. This is a figure of a little winged cherub blowing a horn and holding a wreath of victory against a background of flags and military trophies. So these were clearly made to commemorate some sort of victory in Ireland during the middle of the 18th century. These are probably about 1730, again, same date as the others, 1735, 1740. But just look at the work and the scale of them. Not just a plain everted lip, as we have on one of these, just this simple line with a bit of engraving, but a full cast gadrooned border that's been shaped and put on. Again, the bowl itself is all hand raised, but superb quality castings of these lion masks. And again, this decoration, which you might think would be hand chased and embossed, all of that is cast and applied as well. So no expense has been spared in the production of these. These are for an extremely wealthy client, and these are a celebration of an event through an object which would have been placed on a dining table and would have communicated that message to the diners. But they are remarkable. They're some of the biggest salt cellars I've ever seen. Paul de Lamery did make heavier ones, and certainly in the Victorian period, when they become sculptural objects of figures pulling shells and tritons and seashells and all of that business, they become profoundly more magnificent. But for 18th century cauldron salt cellars, these are, I think, about as good as you can get. And my goodness, if they were fully and clearly marked, we only have Hamilton's maker's mark. Even that's a bit rubbed, but you can make it out IH below a crown on the base of this. Just faint ghosts of things on the bottom of that. And again, somebody's chucked, not that one, but they've thrown that one, and again you can see a little hole there where it's actually got punctured. And that could be, with salt cellars, it can be from salt corrosion. They can have, neglected them, left salt in them for weeks and weeks and weeks, and come back and all of a sudden there's a hole there, which they've had to do. But this goes to show why maybe you should collect names, because they're both glorious pairs of salt cellars. But honestly, look at the individual object, and those are, you'd never wish to find a better pair of Irish salt cellars than those. And in good condition, perfect condition, I couldn't afford those. They'd be many, many, many thousands of pounds, if not touching 5 figures, because the best stuff always is. Whereas these, beautiful. again in perfect condition. Irish salt cellars like this with such lovely hallmarks on the base, they are rare. If you go and Google them now and try and find a pair, you probably won't. But lovely domestic objects made to a high standard. But it just goes to show these things, they are made by the silversmith, but it also depends on the client they had ordering them. And if it was a wealthy client, you got this. If it was a thrifty or a client that couldn't afford the best, you got that. Same goldsmith, same workshop, same period. So it's not all in a name. Hope you've enjoyed seeing those. I've enjoyed showing them to you. Gone on a little bit as well. We may do a close-up of the marks just so you get to see those. And next week, hopefully by next week, I'll have found something interesting and can show it to you. But if not, we'll drag up another subject. Don't you worry about that. So until next week, goodbye and good antiques hunting.